Hey everyone, today I'm taking a look at Antike 2, which is a board game designed by Mac Gertz and published by Rio Grande Games. This one takes 90 to 120 minutes to play and accommodates 3 to 6 players. So this is a Euro strategy resource management war game hybrid that focuses on the rondel mechanism, which Mac Gertz is most known for. But before I get started on my review of Antike 2, I want to give a shout out to the show's sponsor, keyender.co.uk, who are my go-to online retailer here in the UK and actually the place where I picked up Antike 2 from. And if you use my link in the show notes, you can get 5% off your first order. Okay, so the main board for Antike 2 will look like this. At least one of the two maps will look like this, where this side is a bit more Europe-centric, but on the reverse side of the board, you do have an alternative map, which is more focused on the eastern part of the world. And on this map, you can see it's all divided up into these different regions, and within these regions, at least most of them, you have these cities, and these cities are going to produce different resources. So you have 3 different types of resources in this game. You've got iron, you've got gold, and you have marble, and each of those resources are going to have their own uses. At the start of the game, each player is going to have their own kind of starting region. So you can see here the yellow player is more Italy based, where they're going to start with Rome and the surrounding regions, whereas the blue player up here is going to start more in these kind of Germanic regions up here. At the top of the board, you have the scoring track, and the objective of the game is to reach a certain amount of points depending on the player count. So if we were to be playing a 6-player game, the first person to reach 7 points will be the winner. In a 5-player game, it will be 8 points. In a 4-player game, it will be 9 points. And in a 3-player game, it will be 10 points. On the top right-hand side of the board here, you're going to have the action rondel, which is the main mechanism of the game, as is the case with a lot of Mac Gertz games, where, as you'd expect with rondel games, you're going to start initially anywhere you want, but from then on, you can move 1 to 3 spaces around the rondel to take the corresponding action. However, you can discard resources to travel further, and we'll touch on what all those different actions mean a little bit later. There's also going to be a display of these objective cards, which are the way we're going to acquire points throughout the game. So for example, in order to collect this navigator card, I need to have control of 7 different sea areas on the map. And if I have that completed by the end of my turn, I can claim one of these cards and then move up my points tracker to show how well I'm doing. Some of the other cards here, we have this general card here, which means that every time I destroy a temple, I'll claim this card. And there's going to be some preset temples, kind of just as neutral players on the board, but also as the game develops, you as players are going to be building temples because it's a very useful thing to do. You also got this king card here, where for every 5 cities you claim, you can take one of these cards. And if you ever, say, have 5 cities, but you lose one to another player and fall back to 4, you actually do keep control of these cards. But for every kind of 5 increment you get, you can collect another one. So at 5, 10, 15 and 20 cities you have under your control, you'll get another one of these cards. And the same applies to the citizen cards here, where you're going to get points for every 3 temples you control. And there's also these know-all cards here, or know-how cards, I should say, these scholar cards, where for every piece of knowledge that you gain, as in these upgrades at the bottom, you will gain one of those cards if you are the first person to do it. And additionally, if you know all the different knowledges, then you can get this Pliny the Elder card, which will give you a bonus point. Each player's personal pieces are going to look a bit like this, where you have ships, you have soldiers, you have these city markers to show the regions that you control, and you have these little knowledge tokens as well. So for each knowledge you get, you can end up putting one of these tokens on there just to show that you know that and can use that ability. You're also going to have the different resources. So you've got your marble, you've got your iron, you've got your gold, and you also have coins, which are a wild resource. And you've also got the neutral temples and things that you can build throughout the game. Okay, so in this game, you're not going to have a preset amount of rounds or anything like that. You're going to keep on taking turns in order until somebody has reached that points objective. So let's talk about how the players' turns are broken down, because they are broken down into 3 very simple phases. The first of which is to select your action on the rondel. Again, the first time you can place it anywhere, but from then on, you'll be limited to 1 to 3 spaces. But for every resource you discard, you can go another spot around the rondel. Now, let's talk about what the different spaces actually do. So you have these these three spots here, which work in exactly the same way, but correspond to a different resource. So you have the marble one here, the iron one, and the gold one. And when you take one of those actions, let's just say I'm the yellow player and I took this marble action here, you're going to have a look at the corresponding amount of cities you have of that type. So at the start of the game, this is going to be pretty easy because you only ever have one of each. So in this case, I've got one city that's marble, there's corrales here. So therefore I will take one marble from the supply. However, you also always get a coin. The science action spot here allows you to buy upgrades for your little civilization. And when you do that, you're going to have to spend a certain amount of gold. Now, the first time anybody buys a specific type of science upgrade, you're going to have to pay the higher figure here on the left-hand side of the slash. But when you do that, not only are you going to gain access to this ability, and we'll talk about what they are very shortly, but you'll also gain one of these knowledge cards, which are going to be a point at the end of the game. So again, they're very useful to get in there early. So let's talk about what they actually do. So you've got these two spots here which allow you to freely trade resources for other resources. And to start with, it's going to be on a 2-to-1 ratio. So let's just say I had 2 iron and I really needed a gold. I could trade in those 2 iron for that gold. And if you want to upgrade further, you can go down to the next one like this and do it on a 3-to-2 ratio, but you do need to do it in that order. So you can't just go straight to here, you have to go here and then here. But you can see here on the right hand side, once somebody's unlocked this ability for the first time, everybody else is going to get access to it at a much more affordable rate. This one here basically increases your yield by another resource. So let's just say when I took that marble action earlier, I got 1 marble and a coin. This would allow me to get 2 marbles and a coin. But again, once I've done that one, I can slide down to this one here by paying that extra cost and get an extra yield of 2. So it makes you much more efficient and to get resources much quicker. These 2 spots here increase your defenses. So if people want to start attacking your cities, they're going to have to basically spend another troop or an extra 2 troops. And we'll talk about how combat works shortly. And these 2 spots here are very simple and work in pretty much the identical same way, which makes your troops and boats much more maneuverable, because normally as a movement point you can only ever move one spot like this from border to border, but say I had this upgrade, I could actually move a troop with 2 spaces. So we just talked about how movement works, and that's what these 2 spots correspond to. You've also got the temple action here, and when you land on that, you can spend 5 marble to build temples. And you can do that as many times as you want. And when you build temples, you have to build them in places where you already have cities. So let's just say I wanted to build a temple in Roma here. Now, the reason you want to build temples is not only because there is an objective card corresponding to temples, where for every 3 temples you control, you will get a card, which is another point, but they'll also increase your output when producing different goods. So you can see here that my temple is now on the gold region. That means that when I pay out gold now, I won't only get the 1 resource for having a city in that region, but because I got a temple, I will actually get 3 resources. And the final action, which we haven't talked about yet, is the militia action. And when you do that, you are going to spend an amount of iron, and you're going to spend 2 iron for every troop you want to spawn on the board. However, you could only ever spawn troops where you have locations already. So I could say spend 2 to put a troop there, even though that would be a silly idea because I'd want to have a boat there. So let's say I spent 2 to put a boat here, I spent 2 to put a troop here, and I spent another 2 to put a troop here as well. And you can see here I haven't put 2 in the same region because you can actually only spawn 1 troop per place where you have a city. But if you have a temple, you can spawn up to 3. And once you've taken your main rondel action, you're going to have the ability to build as many cities as you want, as long as you have presence there. So let's just say in my previous turn, I actually moved these troops here. I maybe moved 1 up here. If I had 1 of each resource, as in a steel, a marble, and a gold, I can establish a new city in that region. So by spending that resource, I could maybe put one of my control markers in Syracuse here, and maybe even another one, if I have the resources to do so, in Ancona. And once you've taken your rondel action, you've established any cities you want to establish or you can afford to establish, then you're going to check how many objectives you have complete at this moment, or if you've completed any new ones, and claim the cards accordingly. So combat action couldn't be much more simple than in Antike. Essentially, the troops will cancel each other out. So let's just say the blue had a troop here, they spent a movement point and they ventured into a region with another player. They would just cancel each other out like so and kill each other. Now, something that is important to say is that as long as players agree, they do not actually have to fight. So you could say, you know what, I'm happy for the blue to cross through me here, and let's spare our lives and not fight at all. But as soon as one player wants to fight, then it will be happening, and that is when you'll start cancelling each other out. So let's talk about how claiming cities from other players works. So let's just say that the blue player had managed to have this city here like this, and the yellow player was, say, on the bordering region like this. And as their movement, they ventured in to this city with the aim of trying to claim this city from the blue player. Now, when they do that, as normal, the troops are going to cancel each other out like so. So they'll kill each other for one to one, but also the cities count as a strength 1, just like the troops do. So right now, these would cancel each other out like so. And when there's a tie, the attacking player will win that tie and therefore claim the city for themselves and make that under their control. However, earlier in the game, as long as you have fewer than 2 points, you automatically have another strength. So in that example, because the blue hadn't had any points yet, they would actually need another strength, or the yellow would need another strength in order to conquer that. Additionally, by buying certain upgrades here, these defensive upgrades, you can make your cities just passively much more difficult to breach by other players. Now, if you wanted to invade a region containing a temple, it's going to be even more costly for that attacking player, because any region with a temple is going to have a base defense of 3. So this one right here at the moment has a strength or defense value of 3, plus 1 for this troop for a total of 4, and they have fewer than 2 points. Therefore, it'll be a defensive value of 5, meaning that that blue player would have to move in at least 5 troops into that region in order to conquer it for their own. And when they do that, they don't actually take control of the temple, they actually destroy it, meaning they'd have to build a new one themselves if they wanted to. However, they would take control of that city themselves. And as a reward for spending so much effort to destroy that temple, you'll gain one of these general cards here. You can also see that some of these sea regions have this little boat icon on. Now, if you ever have one of your pieces on one of those areas, then that actually counts as a strength of 2 concerning these seas sailed cards. So you can see here, this one needs 7 seas sailed. However, if you have, again, 1 market in there, that's going to count towards 2 of those 7. Okay, so let's get into the review of Antike 2. And I want to start with how the gameplay works and just the mechanisms used here, because I'm always impressed about how Matt Gertz manages to just use very complex, involved and thinky games, but condenses it down into such a digestible and manageable system by utilizing the rondel. And Antike is just another perfect example of Gertz pulling that off to such a high standard, because essentially every one of these actions in their own right could not be more simple. 3 of them are pretty much identical, as in producing resources. 2 of them are just move, and movement couldn't be more easy, just move border to border. And then the other 3 are just, equally as simple. Make troops, get knowledge, as in buy a new upgrade, or make temples. So the fact that that's all you're doing in this game, however, the decision space is rich, is just so impressive to me. I also love how players need to kind of conquer the rondel and how to use each spot to the maximum benefit, because you need to know when to bypass certain actions, because doing things at certain times might not as be efficient as if you wait and hold on and, go past it this turn, but maybe land on it next turn when you have more resources to spend. Because I love it how if you end up on the military action, you can take that military action as many times as you want. If I had 10 iron, that means I could build 5 troops, which is going to be much more efficient than if I just, do it once and then just stop here. And I don't have the cities to actually spawn those troops in the first place. So I love how everything ties hand in hand here. You need the marble because you want the marble to be build the temples, but then you want the temples on certain spots because it's going to increase your yield of the other resources and allow you to spawn more troops. Then you want the troops because you want to move, and you want to move because you want to get more cities. So every single thing goes hand in hand with each other. I think it was a really smart decision not to add the building action into the rondel. You take your rondel action and then you get to build in as many cities as you want anyway, just as a passive action. So it makes the game tick along at a much faster pace, and it feels like you can get a lot done a lot quicker rather than having to wait to go all the way around the rondel one more time. I think this game strikes a wonderful balance between being, that more war game feeling to the economic side of things, because, you can really go for any approach you want to. If you want to go into that more economic feel, then you need to really build up a network of resources, and each of those resources are equally important. You want the marble because the marble is going to allow you to build the temples. Temples are not only great because they give you points, but they also increase your output. You want the iron because iron's going to give you more troops to protect your regions in the first place, and to start venturing into other regions and getting the, establishing cities there. But of course you want the gold because the gold gives you access to all these wonderful upgrades. And although these upgrades, I suppose compared to a lot of other games, might sound pretty subtle and not overly, game breaking. But because the rule set here is so simple, just being able to move an extra border with each troop on your movement turns is massive. It gives you so much more flexibility than if you do not have that. Or even of course, increasing your defenses mean that you can maybe start venturing your troops elsewhere and can leave your cities unmanned because they can pretty much handle themselves. And even within taking that militaristic or economic approach to the game, there are other things you can do within those kind of categories as well. Because, if you want to go for a kind of area majority style approach to the gameplay by controlling the seas, you can do that and just try start building a massive fleet and controlling all the key regions here and try to farm points that way. Again, you can go for that real big smash and grab. If you're falling behind, things might get desperate and you just need to go on the warpath and start smashing people's temples if you can. The fact that you start with pretty much nothing in this game but can end up with a massive empire feels satisfying. You start with just cities and no troops at all, but as the game goes on, you can start to see how far you've ventured off and where you've established new cities and get more and more resources that you can produce. It feels like you've achieved a lot by the end of the game, which I think it was a very wise design choice for the battles to go in favour of the attacking player. If there is a tie, like if there's a one-on-one tie here, the city will go to that attacking player. And although it's going to cost a troop, which might be something you need to factor in because troops, they're not the cheapest and it does take quite a bit of time to move them around the map. But the fact that you can spend it in order to gain something rather than having to build up a huge force, a big military just to take one city, I think that could have brought the game to a bit of a halt. Whereas this one, because the attack does go, or the wars do go in favour of the attacker, it does feel like that incentive does slightly weigh in the favour of that attacker to make things a bit more spicy and to kind of put the players on the edge of their seats, because you need to have all your wits about you to decide where are these attacks coming from, where do I need to build my defences, and what kind of contingencies can I put in place if somebody comes in and snatches some of my best regions. You are looking at around a 2-hour time frame to play this game, which to be honest I think is completely fair and justified, especially considering that the turns are so lightning fast. There's very little downtime. You're not waiting for your turn to come around and just getting bored and frustrated when you're not involved in any conflicts. This one you are always engaged, and to be honest, when I've played it, I've not felt for a second that the game has dragged on too long, and I've enjoyed the whole process. I also feel the game scales pretty well because the amount of points are adjusted depending on that player count. So, if you're playing a 6-player game, you're not going to have to wait until somebody gets 10 points because that's going to be just too long. But you are only getting to 7 points, which makes a big difference. And I think the feeling of the game does change quite a lot because if you are playing with, say, 3 players, you are going to be exploring more and you're not going to be standing on each other's toes as much. And I suppose your forces are going to be a bit more diluted around the board. But if you are playing, say, a 6-player game or a 5-player game, it's going to be a lot more contested and probably going to be a bit more conflict heavy because there's just not the land there available to grab. But considering it does scale from 3 to 6, I think it does a good job of catering to all those player counts. I think the game is pretty much perfectly produced. Everything looks great. I love the look of this map. It looks fantastic. Traditional Euro pieces, as in the boats and the meeples. All the colours are well differentiated. You can clearly see what all the different cities are. And even the iconography of the different technologies is absolutely spot on. I suppose the only minor pain is the fact that the rondel is right in the top corner there, meaning that if you're sat on the other side of the table, you have to lean all the way across in order to move your player piece. So that's a little bit inconvenient, and it might have been a good idea to have a separate rondel, taken out of the main board. An additional minor nitpick is that as the game develops, of course, you're going to be claiming more and more cities, and sometimes it can be a bit tedious having to calculate each time how much of a resource you are producing. So I thought it would have been a nice touch if each person had their own little player board which could track how many resources they're producing. So at a glance, they could say, you know what, I've got 7 marble cities, therefore I'm producing 7 marble. So that would be a lot nicer rather than having to calculate each time, because it is so dynamic and things are constantly changing. Okay, so let's get into some final thoughts on Antike 2. This is a game that does exactly what it says on the tin. It is a perfect hybrid that seamlessly mixes a Euro economic game with a war game. And the fact that it does it in such a streamlined and simple package is quite remarkable, as you'd expect with Matt Gertz, using that rondel system to the highest degree possible. Making a game of this depth teachable in 10 minutes is just quite fantastic. I do think that, you are going to either be on board with the zero-sum nature of the combat and things like that. Some people are going to want that wild card in terms of the dice rolling and things. So, bear that in mind. And despite me having kind of no objective criticisms of the game, I think it just works so well. And there's nothing I would really change about it. This is still one of those games that I would need to be in the right mood to play. And to be honest, my mood is leaning towards this kind of thing more and more than it was, say, a year or two ago, when I'm a bit more kind of receptive of being a bit more in players' faces and being a bit more conflict driven. But I do love the fact that you have this option of maybe building a military force just to repel people and then focusing on other things and getting your points economically rather than, trying to squash and crush your opponents. But I do like the fact that you can kind of zigzag on that. If things aren't going so well, you can maybe start building up a force and going to conquer the world instead and trying to catch up by destroying other people's temples. And for all those reasons, this is no doubt going to earn a chairman's commendation. Now, I suppose the main question is here, where does this rank compared to the other Matt Gertz games and other kind of more conflict Euro games that I have in my collection? So Matt Gertz generally is one of my favourite designers ever. 2 of his games are ranked extremely high, and we're going to start with the upper echelons here. So Concordia, definitely his kind of magnum opus, I suppose, and that one is ranking as high as number 5 at the time of this recording. And let's be honest, this game isn't quite up to that level. Navigador, another one that I rank slightly lower than Concordia, but I still love it. Again, a more passive Euro with a lot less conflict involved. That one I rank at number 15. Alternatively, I had Hamburgum, which I think was a kind of a less refined version of Navigador, but it still had a lot of qualities. Now, where I've placed Antike at the moment is between Hamburgum and Navigador. So really impressive debut, really, especially considering it is so conflict driven, or has the potential for this much conflict. Really impressed by this one. Probably not going to hit the table that often, but when it does, I know I'm going to enjoy it. So that is Antike 2 by Matt Gertz.